Good afternoon, everyone. I think we will get started. So my name is Sarah Lewis. I will be your presenter today, and I will be presenting our webinar on the essentials for a SharePoint business case. Before we begin, there are a couple of things I'd like to point out which will make sure you get the best experience when using the Link 2013 web client that we're on today. Firstly, I recommend switching your browser to full screen mode. In Internet Explorer, you can do this by hitting F11, or you can maximize the window. Secondly, please switch to the presentation view. This is achieved by clicking on the layout icon on the bottom right corner. Click the icon and then choose presentation view. And finally, we have time for questions at the end, but please feel free to send us any questions as they occur to you. You can do this using the link instant messaging icon, which you can see in the bottom left of your screen. We'll also open up the phone lines at the end if anyone would like to ask their question in person. The agenda I'm going to be covering today is a little bit about who BlueSource are, some of the common SharePoint misconceptions. I'll clarify objectives and benefits, which are obviously key to a business case. I'll discuss return on investment and the true cost of SharePoint. And then I'll discuss how SharePoint helps your business case. So why choose SharePoint as the technology to meet your objectives and benefits, and obviously how BlueSource can help. So who are BlueSource? We've had a really strong level of interest in today's webinar, which tells me there are a lot of folks out there either planning to do something new with SharePoint or wondering how to breathe life into an existing project. As I imagine many of you are new to BlueSource, you may be wondering who we are and what qualifies us to be dispensing tips on SharePoint. We should start off by saying that BlueSource works slightly differently to many of the other SharePoint coding factories that you may be familiar with. BlueSource takes a more personal approach to SharePoint with clients and prefers to run a smaller team of very experienced developers and information architects. We've been around. When it comes to SharePoint, BlueSource has been around. There's been a huge amount of change in the technology and architecture of SharePoint platform over the last 10 plus years, but there are some fundamental principles we've learnt in this time which are less about technology and much more about the framework and process that is common among successful SharePoint implementations. The advent of Office 365 and Windows Azure creates even more possibilities for SharePoint, but the principles discussed today will apply no matter how or where you host your infrastructure. So BlueSource, we're a triple gold certified Microsoft partner, including collaboration and content, which is a SharePoint specific gold certification. We have over 100 SharePoint implementations and some of the best developers in the business. We can help through the whole project lifecycle, right from helping you create your business case to analysis, the full development, or helping your team develop a solution, and then obviously support. So if you're one of our existing customers, you probably already know, and we have a 24/7 365 service desk, and that applies equally for SharePoint as it does with our other technologies, and we have a full SharePoint monitoring and management service. So enough about us. Why are we running the webinar today? We're running it for 5 key reasons, really. To help businesses articulate the value of a SharePoint project. So what are the benefits that you're going to achieve from this project? To outline what goes into creating a solid business case for SharePoint. So making sure you've included everything, included the costs and bits and pieces. To share our experiences of how SharePoint can help make your business case shine. So that's why I choose SharePoint compared to other technologies. To highlight some of the common misconceptions around SharePoint, and I'm actually going to start off with that, and to explain how BlueSource can assist during the business case stage of a project. So some of the common SharePoint misconceptions. SharePoint is free. I'm still hearing this a lot in the marketplace. The main reason that we hear this is because you may or may not be familiar with something called SharePoint Foundation. It used to be called WSS. This is a cut down, trimmed down version of SharePoint that you get as part of Windows Server, as part of your Windows Server licensing.
So you don't need to pay for client access licenses, you don't need to pay for SharePoint server licenses. It's that trimmed down version. And especially with the earlier incarnations of SharePoint, a lot of people use that as a gateway into getting familiar with SharePoint. Um, I'm going to talk later on in the webinar about a number of different costs associated with SharePoint that will hopefully demonstrate that SharePoint's not free. At the very least, it's going to take time for someone to implement it. You still need to think about user adoption and your kind of change management processes, and so there is a cost associated with it. It's best just to hand SharePoint over to the users and let them figure it out. Probably almost everyone on this webinar, I would suspect, has been part of a SharePoint project or is familiar with SharePoint. And if you have been part of one of those projects, you may have heard that when you just hand it over to users, that's often when SharePoint fails. Now, this isn't because the technology is difficult to understand. It's just like using Word or Excel, really. The difficulty or the bit that needs to be explained to users is why they should be using SharePoint, when they should be using SharePoint, and equally important, when they shouldn't be using SharePoint. And that's part of your user adoption strategy. SharePoint does everything. I think Microsoft started this rumor. SharePoint technically could do anything because at the heart it's a development platform, but there are some things that SharePoint's really good at, and there's some things that you should steer away from using SharePoint for. If you're thinking of creating a business case now for something that you think might be a little bit edge case for SharePoint, then feel free to get in touch with your account manager or myself, and I'd be more than happy to kind of share what our views are in terms of whether that's the right application for SharePoint. And finally, migrating is easy. And once again, if you've ever been part of any migration project, you'll know that that's not the case. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We're going to run a whole webinar on migration. But there's lots of things to think about up front. If you plan for it and if you take into consideration all of those things, you can make that migration process smooth. But it's about spending that time at the outset of a project. So, what do you need in your business case? Every business case I've ever seen has been slightly different, depending on the industry that you're in, depending on your specific organizational template. Your headings may be different to what you're seeing on the screen right now, but basically there are 5 key things that need to be thought about in any business case. And if you consider these 5 things and you understand what you're going to put in the business case, then no matter what the headings are, you've got a great foundation for a great business case. And so those 5 things are your business objectives and benefits, cost, return on investment, justification, so that's why you're choosing SharePoint and not something else, and further considerations. And I'm going to take you through each of these headings now. Starting with, surprise, surprise, business objectives and benefits. Business objectives and benefits are probably where, when we're talking to our customers, this is where people really get stuck. Coming up with what the benefits are of SharePoint, and this ties in later into return on investment. The easiest way to come up with business objectives and benefits that will tie into return on investment is start with the problems that you're trying to solve. So talk to your users, or you may already understand those problems really well, but things like users can't find their information, or there's multiple data sources creating information silos. These are problems that you're trying to solve that you can then turn into objectives and benefits. So to give you an example, I was with a customer about a month ago, talking to them about their SharePoint implementation. So they're using it for an intranet. And it's gone very well, but they're finding it really difficult to justify to the board the ongoing spend for SharePoint. So that's the support, the kind of ongoing development to continue to grow it out for other applications in the business. So I was there to talk to them about that. Over the course of the conversation, actually when we were having a coffee break, one of the team was filling out a leave form. and they started talking about the leave form process. So in this organisation, you fill out a leave form, you give it to your manager, they check your leave allocation and who else is on leave, and then they give it to they approve it, hopefully give it to a second manager who double checks all of that information. They approve it, give it back to you, you give it to HR and HR process it. End to end, they estimate this takes about 4 hours of time. And so the problem that they're trying to solve is leave forms take too much time to fill out, and kind of a sub problem of that is they often get lost as well, which obviously takes even more time. So the objective in this case, we decided this was a nice, simple piece of work, a day to implement, and they have a number of business processes like this once we got the ball rolling. The objective is to streamline the leave application process. And the benefits in this case are reduce the time it takes in the leave application process from half a day to less than an hour. And I'll come back to this when we start talking about return on investment. So overall, describe the benefits SharePoint will have to the business. Again, talk to your stakeholders if you need those little nuggets of information to find those key hooks that are going to create strong benefits and strong return on investment. But don't bite off more than you chew. So particularly if you get your users involved, they're going to come up with loads of different areas where you can help solve problems that they've got or streamline processes. So we absolutely recommend talking to those users, those stakeholders, but create a roadmap for the SharePoint vision. So you're listening to everything that they have to say, but you're implementing that in phases. And so for phase one, what we recommend is it's big enough to provide value, but small enough that you're not changing the whole way that the organization works, not biting off more than you can chew. And once again, everyone knows this, but we've all been guilty of forgetting about it, particularly when we're putting together a business case. The benefits should be SMART benefits, so specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time limited. And if we go back to my earlier example, reduce the time it takes in the leave application process from half a day to less than an hour, you can see that that's specific. It's specific to the leave application process. It's measurable, so you're able to measure whether it takes less than an hour, particularly in SharePoint you can do that. It's attainable. It's actually a very small kind of goal. It's relevant to the business in this case, and it's time limited. So from day one, in this specific scenario, you'll start achieving that benefit. So moving on to costs. There's a number of costs on the screen. These are the typical costs when we're implementing a SharePoint project with our customers or talking to them about it. These are the typical costs that we see most organisations incur. I'm happy to send these slides out afterwards if you'd like a kind of checklist of costs to make sure you've thought of everything. But there's two costs that I'll highlight now that are often forgotten. The first is third-party products. So if you're implementing SharePoint for document management, for example, you may or may not know that SharePoint natively stores all of the documents as blobs in SQL, and this is very technical, but there's products that you can get to remove them from SQL, which means that you don't have limitations with SharePoint that you would otherwise have if you've got loads and loads and loads of documents. There are third-party products that help development go faster, like Nintex. So if you're doing lots of workflows, Nintex can reduce the time it takes to develop them and overall decrease the cost for that development. There are loads of great third-party products on the market. And so it's worth understanding what third-party products you may require upfront. Some of them are a may require, it may increase the speed of development or the speed to get the system to users. Some of them might be necessary, like the remote blob storage for document management. But it's worth talking to someone like us if you're not sure what third-party products you may require. And then at least if you decide not to use them, you know that you've made an informed choice. Similarly, support and ongoing management. This is something we often see forgotten in business cases, but because of the nature of SharePoint, it's important. And there's two kind of key things here. The first is the feeding and watering and monitoring of the servers and the governance of SharePoint, so making sure that it's being used for the right things. That's the proactive support and ongoing management. And then you've got obviously the reactive support. So if something breaks, or if someone's forgotten how to administer something, forgotten how to configure something, and that you've got someone available to help you with that. And then here are some of the soft costs. So these won't necessarily be attributed to a vendor if you're working with a vendor, or to licensing, but, oh, excuse me. But these are things that might take time, and so it's worth thinking about them and allocating time to these activities in your business case. Things like governance that I've talked about, SharePoint training, and user adoption. And when we're talking about cost within a business case context, we often see these terms. So total cost of ownership, that's all of those costs put together. This is the total cost of ownership for the system over 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Return on investment, I'm going to talk specifically about return on investment in a minute. But the reason that I bring that up is because you then have payback period. And payback period is that total cost of ownership divided by your return on investment. So how soon the system is going to pay for itself. And then cost per employee. We're seeing this more and more in business cases. I think since the cloud's become more popular, it's more palatable. But also, even for customers who aren't using the cloud, who aren't using Office 365 or Azure, the cost per employee is something that puts into context the overall cost compared to benefits that you're going to achieve. So on to return on investment, there are 3 elements to return on investment, and all of these will be driven by the specific benefits that your organisation is trying to achieve. The 3 elements are hard or tangible return on investment. So this is where you save money or money's returned, so process efficiencies, or you're not having to pay for licenses. This is typically easily calculated but difficult to come up with. Soft return on investment, so this is things like efficiency gains where you can't attribute a monetary value, or increased employee satisfaction. It's difficult to attribute a monetary gain to these things, but often it's a lot simpler to come up with examples of them. And then finally, compliance and risk mitigation. So if we take each of these individually, tangible return on investment or hard return on investment, I've got some examples there to show you, or to kind of get you thinking about the types of things we typically see included here. And once again, it ties back to the benefits I talked about earlier, the specific benefits that you're trying to achieve. So if we go back to my example, reduce the time it takes in the leave application process from half a day to less than an hour. In this case, what we did is we said, well, that's a 3-hour saving per application, per leave form filled out. On average, each individual fills out 5 leave forms in a year, so that's 15 hours per individual in the organisation, times by the number of individuals in the organisation, so in this case it was 250, and then times that by the average employee salary to get the efficiency saving that you're going to get, or the return on investment you're going to get from the cost that you're going to put in, or for this business case. Soft return on investment, these are improved collaboration, improved employee satisfaction, those softer things where it's hard to attribute a monetary value to. Where we see these work really well is where they line up with strategic organisational objectives. So for example, one of our customers has an organisational objective to improve employee satisfaction, which in turn improves staff retention. So they've got employee satisfaction forms that they all fill out, surveys, that they've got a number of HR initiatives, and SharePoint was kind of underpinning that objective. So the benefits that they wanted to get out of SharePoint were improve employee satisfaction. Therefore, the return on investment aligned to those organizational objectives. So it wasn't about returning money to the organization or saving money for the organization. It was about empowering the organization to meet their objectives. And compliance and risk mitigation. So again, sometimes it's not about that hard or soft return on investment. It's about making sure that your organisation is compliant with things like the Freedom of Information Act or any retention and disposal compliance that you have within the organisation. It might underpin a disaster recovery and business continuity plan because you can access SharePoint from anywhere. If you combine that with the power of Link, people can work from literally anywhere, whether it's home in the case of a disaster or a coffee shop. As long as they've got the internet, they can continue to work. Or reputational savings. So another customer of ours had a number of different extranets on things like Dropbox and Box.net managed within the business, so there was no governance from IT, which meant that they were unable to determine exactly who had access to what and when. Well, it was a nightmare to find that information out. And so they identified a huge amount of reputational risk. If employees left and went to competitors, they might still have access to this confidential information. And so what they did is they pulled all of those extranets into SharePoint, and so removed Dropbox, removed Box.net, put it all in SharePoint, and that way they could manage the permission. So if someone left, either within their organisation or one of their third-party customers or suppliers left, they could make sure that they no longer had access to that critical information. So if you've built a strong case, you've got strong business benefits, you've come up with the cost, you've got really good return on investment or compliance justification for moving forward with the business case, then the next thing is justify why you choose SharePoint. Once again, this is going to be specific to the application that you're using SharePoint for and the benefits you're trying to achieve, but I've tried to come up with some generic benefits, the top 5 benefits that we see, or top 5 justifications that we see of using SharePoint compared to other technologies. And once again, I'm happy to send this out to you. So SharePoint provides a common Microsoft interface that users understand. So compared to some other technologies, the learning curve for users to learn how to use it is really small. Core capabilities are ahead of traditional technologies. Again, this depends on the technologies we're comparing it to, but typically we see that social media capabilities are more advanced than most technologies. The integration with obviously Office, Link and CRM, which are Microsoft products, is advanced. You've got the ability to connect SharePoint to other line of business systems, and when you're looking at kind of extranet functionality or potentially even document management functionality, that's more advanced than your traditional technologies. And then as a strategic asset for reaching organizational objectives, so it's not a point solution for just one thing like document management. You might start with one thing, but then you've got the licenses, you've got the infrastructure in place and support in place to then grow it out to meet other strategic organisational objectives, such as knowledge management, business process improvement, social, extranets, BI, those types of things. And finally, it's low risk. So SharePoint is a well supported platform by vendors. So there's multiple different vendors who support it. There's a huge ecosystem. If you search online for any problem that you're having, or if you search online for how to write a business case in SharePoint, I'm sure that you'll get loads of different results. So there's that ecosystem that's sharing all of that information so that it's easy to maintain and manage your SharePoint system. There's also a large pool of resources, so as I said, vendors, IT staff, but a lot of third-party products or a lot of other systems now have modules that will integrate with SharePoint because it's such a widely used system in the enterprise. And then consideration. So in any business case, there's typically an area where there's other considerations. This is where you might put your roadmap. This is where you might put the other strategic objectives that you could meet with using SharePoint in the future. But something that I really urge you to include in the considerations area of a business case is user adoption. User adoption is critical to realize the benefits that you're trying to achieve in your business case. And so if you include the time for user adoption and the plan for user adoption as a consideration, then you can make sure that you've got that business buy-in, you've got access to the users when you need it, and you've got that time set aside to implement that plan. Obviously, identify advocates. So if you're talking to people right at the beginning when you're building the business case, they're probably your advocates moving forward. So keep them involved through the whole project. And decide who will own SharePoint once it's live. So SharePoint's an ongoing technology. You're going to have new users start the organization who are going to need to go through training. There's a good chance that you're going to adapt and grow SharePoint as you start to use it. And so you might need to do refresher courses for people or send out information letting them know that they can now use it for this. So where BlueSource can assist. If you're writing a business case now and you want to sanity check that business case, we're more than happy to assist with that. So you can send the business case to your account manager, they'll get me involved, and we can do a sanity check of that business case. Make sure that you're presenting it in the best way, or just sanity check that you've thought of everything. We can help upfront identify return on investment, so we can help facilitate workshops where we can brainstorm ideas, talk to users or stakeholders about the pains, the problems they're trying to solve, and we can also identify whether SharePoint's the correct technology to be using in the first place. During a project, we can take full ownership of the implementation, or we can work as part of your project team. We can help with the upfront analysis right through to support. So as I said earlier, we've got 24/7 support, full managed service if you require it. And then additional services we offer, so health checks, governance planning. We have a quick start, a rescue service. We've just worked with one customer to do a POC, a proof of concept on Office 365 to determine whether that's going to meet their requirements. So if there's anything you need help with and you're not sure whether we can provide it, obviously you're more than welcome to get in touch with us. So I've hit our time. We've got about 3 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions? So Karen's asked, how does SharePoint sync with social collaboration tools? I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but I'll try my best to answer it. And Karen, I can follow up with you. Yammer. So Yammer has integration with SharePoint. So you may or may not know that Microsoft purchased or acquired Yammer about a year ago or 18 months ago. If you're using Office 365, there's native integration built in because Yammer's a cloud technology. If you're using SharePoint and it's hosted on-premise or on something like Azure or Cloud 24/7, which is BlueSource's cloud offering, there is still integration, but it needs to be, there's a certain amount of implementation that's required for that. Most collaboration tools now do have an integration with SharePoint, and so if you're looking at other integration tool, other social tools like Jive or NewsGator. NewsGator actually has its own web parts for SharePoint. Most of them do integrate. With SharePoint 2013 though, there is an awful lot, I'm not sure if Karen, you've seen SharePoint 2013, there is an awful lot of social components within the product now. So Microsoft picked up on the social trend. They tried to implement it in 2010, or they made a step towards it in 2010. In 2013, there's actually a lot that you can do out of the box just with configuration now. Does that answer your question? Yep. Okay. I'm more than happy to have a kind of more in-depth conversation with you, Karen, if you want to talk about what you're trying to achieve and what products you're looking at and how they integrate. So we could pick that up separately. Ross, if you could take a note, that would be perfect. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We will follow up over the next couple of weeks just to say hi, make sure that we covered everything you were expecting.
at that time, feel free to ask for the slides and we will send them through. But if there's anything specific you're thinking about, or if you do have any questions regarding what I've presented today, or any questions regarding SharePoint at all, really, my email address is right there. So it's sarah.lewis@bluesource.co.uk, and you're more than welcome to drop me a line, and I'll either email you back or give you a call, and we can have a conversation. So hope everyone has a good afternoon, and I will talk to you all again soon. Thank you.